let's go ahead and get started. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining our SupplyPike Academy webinar today. Today, we are going to be talking about allowance deductions. And to get us started, just really quickly, an introduction to the hosts of the webinar today. So my name is Kristen Icewarner. I am the VP of Customer Success here at SupplyPike. So I lead both our customer success, our support team, as well as our account management team. So anytime you have questions as you're using the SupplyPike applications, we'd love you to reach out using our chat tool or, of course, our other support resources that we have available, which we'll talk about in a little more detail towards the end of the webinar today. But I also have Weston Parks with me today, and I'll let Weston give a quick introduction of himself.
Perfect. Yeah, hey y'all, I'm Weston Parks. I'm the product manager for Deductions Navigator Walmart. So yeah, we're going to be diving into some allowance deductions and then have a little in-app walkthrough of what this practically looks like in the app.
Awesome. Thanks, Weston. So just quickly, our agenda for today's webinar, we're going to, like Weston said, look at Walmart allowance deductions. We're going to do a bit of an overview of allowance deductions and looking at your supplier agreements first. And then we'll dive right into a live training session or demonstration of the SupplyPike application and how you can use SupplyPike to identify valid or invalid allowance deductions and disputing anything that is invalid. We will definitely have time for questions. So if you'd like to, you can go ahead and pull up your Q&A box inside of Zoom. Should be on the black Zoom toolbar located at the bottom of your screen. You can just open up that Q&A tab. And if you have any questions as we go through the content today, please feel free to type your questions in there and we'll make sure to get those answered. A couple housekeeping items before we get started. We will be sending out a copy of both the slide deck that you see in today's presentation, as well as a recording of the video. It does take us a bit to process the video, usually about 3 to 4 days. So once that's ready to go, we will send you an email with copies of the deck and the video for you. Again, we've already kind of talked about questions, but just a quick reminder, use that Q&A tab on Zoom to type in your questions and we'll make sure and address those either by responding verbally when we have time for Q&A today, or we can type out an answer to you as well. All right, so let's start just kind of with a high-level overview on understanding Walmart allowance deductions. So to start us off, we really need to understand supplier agreements. So we're going to look at how to use your supplier agreement to determine validity and fight deductions with SupplyPike. We're going to walk through how to upload your supplier agreement to Walmart Deductions Navigator. And we're going to talk through setting up and using the auto dispute feature. So let's start with the basics. What is a supplier agreement? Your supplier agreement is a legal document that details your agreement to adhere to Walmart's supplier standards. So these apply to anyone supplying product to Walmart for resale and any agents used by suppliers. Your supplier agreement is going to include general supplier information, terms of shipping, terms of payment. It'll include things for returned merchandise and, of course, any agreed upon discounts or allowances will also be in your supplier agreement. So why would you need to upload your supplier agreement to Deductions Navigator for Walmart? That supplier agreement is going to help the SupplyPike application understand if the allowance deductions that you see in SupplyPike are valid or invalid according to what is agreed upon in your supplier agreement. So when Weston walks us through how to enter the supplier agreement into SupplyPike, he'll show us some of the ways that you can tell SupplyPike what your agreed upon allowances are. So in addition to that, SupplyPike is going to attach the supplier agreement to any relevant deductions that you receive. So adding the supplier agreement information into SupplyPike Deductions Navigator is basically going to activate the validity judgment on those allowance deductions, and it's going to give you the ability to dispute any invalid allowance deductions that are being taken excessively. So before you can add your supplier agreement into SupplyPike and begin seeing those validity judgments, you're going to need to download your supplier agreement from RetailLink. So you should be able to access your supplier agreement by logging in to your RetailLink account. And you'll notice the screenshot towards the bottom here. You're going to click on your user profile and then click on this option here that says My Agreements. So from there, it's going to take you to the My Agreements screen, and you'll see a button that says Sign an Agreement. Now, I know that seems a little scary to click, but you're not actually signing anything when you click that button. Once you do click on Sign an Agreement, you'll be able to either view or edit or download the supplier agreement document. And you'll want to do that for each business unit that you need to add into SupplyPike. So there may be multiple supplier agreements there for you on that screen. Now, a little, I guess, caveat here is that we have noticed that some suppliers see a dialog that says switch to the latest version. So if you see something that says switch to the latest version, you will want to click on that before clicking on sign an agreement. And that will just let you download the latest version of your supplier agreement there. So after you download that document to your computer, you're going to return to Deductions Navigator to upload the document. And again, we're going to walk you through the steps to show you how to actually add that document into SupplyPike, along with all of the steps that you need, to fill out your supplier agreement allowances during the training or demonstration portion here shortly. But before we do that, let's look at the deductions codes that are going to help, that the supplier agreement will help you with in SupplyPike. Now, we all know that shortage codes are really the bread and butter of what SupplyPike users dispute in SupplyPike, and that's not going to change with this feature. However, it does open up your ability to dispute invalid allowance deductions so that you can be really comprehensive in fighting anything that is invalid that's hitting your bottom line. So the value of this feature is really that it helps you identify any of those invalid allowances and dispute the ones that are just incorrect or excessive. You may have fewer invalid allowance deductions than shortages, obviously, because Walmart actually automates the allowance system. So there's much less human error involved in allowances. In contrast, with shortage deductions, we see a lot of human error that causes those deductions. But when they are invalid, we want to make sure that you have visibility into that and have the option to dispute them. So you'll see a list of available codes here on the slide on the left-hand side. And these are the codes that your supplier agreement will help you to dispute inside of SupplyPike. I also have a link to our help center here at the bottom. We have a lot of detailed information on allowance deductions in our help center, and then also just best practices for disputing each of these codes. So, if you have any questions, I would suggest that you take a look at our help center. It's a really great knowledge base to find out more information on each of these codes. So just a quick, overview of auto dispute for allowances. So along with just individually disputing any invalid allowance codes, We've also added the ability for you to auto dispute those codes. So you'll see several of them listed on the screen here. You can enable auto disputing for any of these codes in SupplyPike. So we'll take a look shortly at how to set up auto disputing for allowance codes in SupplyPike, and how to, include any of these codes here in your auto disputing settings. So that was a kind of a good overview of allowance deductions and allowance codes and what you can do with SupplyPike. But I'd like to have Weston show you how to do that in SupplyPike. So I'm actually going to transfer the screen share over to Weston to take us through a demonstration. Weston?
Perfect. Thank you, Krista. All right. Can y'all see my screen here, Krista?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, cool. So what we're looking at here, kind of like Krista mentioned, is we're going to do a demo app, just show what this practically looks like in Deductions Navigator. So the first thing we'll start with is how to add that supplier agreement. So we're going to say, you went into Retail Link, downloaded your supplier agreement, and now you are going to upload it to Deductions Navigator. The way you do that is come up to your settings here. You'll see a few different options here that you can look through. We can come back to this in a minute, but supplier agreements is what we're interested in this case. And so this is the page that basically serves as a repository for any and all supplier agreements that you want to add. And by adding this, like we've talked about, it serves two purposes. It can, one, auto attach it to all relevant deductions, specifically allowance deductions that you might receive for that specific supplier agreement. You can see we have it broken up by that 9-digit vendor number. So that acts as the map to know which deductions these go to. And then that second purpose is by inputting what that supplier agreement states will help give us a validity judgment so that you can see if you receive a allowance deduction that is invalid that you should fight. We can offer insight onto which of those to take a look at and even auto dispute those as well. So I'm getting ahead of myself a little. We'll go to uploading your supplier agreement, be that step one. So you can see that when you add an agreement, you're going to choose wherever you've saved that file, of course. And once you do upload it, it will bring you to this screen here. So all this is saying essentially is it's really important that you set up these parameters as they're stated on that agreement, because this is what affects that validity judgment, and we want to make sure it's as accurate as possible. So the department number, that's just that 2-digit at the top of any and every supplier agreement. You'll see that 9-digit vendor ID. And the department number is just what comes after that 6-digit vendor ID. So you can see that it auto-populates for only department numbers that have actually received a deduction that we've detected in the past 2 years. But if you're wanting to set this up as insurance, hey, it hasn't hit I haven't gotten any deductions for the specific department yet, but on the off chance I do, I want to make sure this is in place. This is where you can click any department that's available there. And then sequence number is just that last digit on the supplier agreement. It's the 9-digit vendor ID, of course, it's that last digit there. So up next is that effective date. I'm sure you guys know that these supplier agreements, they don't change all that frequently, which is nice, because if you're having to upload these into Deductions Navigator, it should last you several years before you have to go and edit that again in the future. So weird thing about supplier agreements for Walmart is that they don't have an expiration date. But that effective date is important, so we know, when to start, when this specific supplier agreement started, and we can map it to only those relevant deductions. So next up is the actual allowance types. We have all of them that you might see. Of course, this is the different deduction codes that you might receive. This is that all of the different allowance types that basically Walmart builds out. So on that supplier agreement, you'll see all of the different ones that are listed. And just to make it easy, let's go ahead and download this example. So of course, your supplier agreement can be 15 to 25 pages long, but towards the end of any supplier agreement, you'll see the allowance section, and that's the part that we're interested in when it comes to fighting allowance deductions. So here you can see there's 4 different allowance types stated, and so that's what we're inputting here. So if I go back to this and I'm editing it, first one stated there is that new store allowance at 10% off the invoice, off of every invoice. And you know, that's literally what's stated here. So you would just go through here and list each one that's stated there, specific, the percentages, you know, what's key here is making sure that's correct. I mean, I will point out Walmart's a little strange in the way they, for WA/QD, it's listed as 1. We like to break that up and have them as separate ones just to ensure we're catching any and all deductions that might come through for those. So once you have those allowance types and percentages and frequency and method set up, then you're good to go. You can go ahead and save it. And from there, it'll be saved. And you can pull this up, edit it, review it at any time. In this example, you can see there's 2 supplier agreements. We know a lot of times there's several different supplier agreements that you guys are operating under. But having them all here, it'll be saved indefinitely, where you can reference and see at a glance what your allowance specifics are. So that's nice as that kind of repository for any and all supplier agreements. But then also behind the scenes, what's going on is once you input this, is we're actually mapping to any deductions that you might have received and doing a validity analysis based off of what we input here. So that was kind of getting back to the agenda here. We've gone through and we've added our supplier agreement. I showed you how you can edit your supplier agreement. Now let's look at an example of what an allowance deduction with that supplier agreement looks like. So this is your Deductions Navigator users will know that this is where you do all of the work in our app. This shows any and all AP deductions that you receive. It gets updated daily, so you can see in real time what there is on the table to dispute. And there's a few different ways you can dispute it, of course. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. For this example, we're going to look at any allowance deduction that came in. So I know that this one meets the criteria for that supplier agreement. And so say you found this code 54 warehouse allowance that came in, you click in the details to see what's going on here. You'll see a few things. Deductions Navigator has a lot of data here pulled from a lot of different retail link apps to show you what happened and why it happens. So why did you receive this deduction, as well as do we see it as a valid or invalid deduction? So this deduction specifically is for a warehouse allowance. Walmart's saying that you didn't give a warehouse allowance on this deduction. And so you'll see here all of the necessary proof documents that are helpful to review in determining if you want to dispute this claim or not. So you'll see the purchase order, the invoice, the claim, and then this is what we just uploaded. It's that supplier agreement. So if we open this up, we will see that supplier agreement that states what we're supposed to see on each invoice. You're supposed to give a 1% discount for warehouse allowances. So now we can go into the invoice and see if we did give that allowance or not. And again, this is telling us that we didn't based off the logic. It went through and looked at the invoice, looked at the supplier agreement. It says that there is not a percentage given for that allowance. And then we can just manually check as well. You can see here that there were no adjustments given on this, which means that this is probably a valid deduction. So from here, if it's a valid deduction, you probably don't want to fight it. But if it were invalid or likely invalid, that's when you would want to dispute this and have Walmart take a second look at this. All right, so that was kind of an example of what those allowance deductions look like in app, as well as that validity judgment. And then I'm going to transition now to talking about auto disputing. So as you can see, the validity judgment is really cool. We offer it for a lot of different deductions. Shortage deductions, of course, is the bread and butter of what most people are disputing on a daily or weekly basis. We offer validity judgments on that as well as these allowance deductions and those code 11 pricing deductions. And so not only are we able to show all your AP deductions that you received, but we're also to give some insight on, hey, take a look at these specific ones, because we show that these have a high chance of being invalid. So with that, let's move over to auto dispute, because this is something we built out in 2022. What we found is, you can dispute one at a time to review all of that info like we just talked about. You can bulk dispute 25 at a time, even 100 at a time, but we wanted to go kind of above and beyond just that and say, okay, if we have this validity judgment baked into our app, how can we help our customers save some time and dispute these for them? And so what this means is that we can auto dispute some of those common deductions that you might receive, but we're also going to put some guardrails in place to save you the hassle. Of course, we don't want to dispute every and any deduction that might come in. You guys might want to lay eyes on it. You only want to dispute ones that are actually ready, aka deductions that have that proof document in place. And also, we want to be able to provide you that validity analysis so that you're only disputing those deductions that you have a high chance of getting repaid. And so that's what this page here is auto disputing. And you can see here, there's a few different categories of codes we've broken this into. For the point of this webinar, of course, is allowance codes. And so this is where you could go in and say, okay, I uploaded my supplier agreement. I put in all of the parameters of those supplier agreements. I don't want to go in and mess with and look at every code 54 that comes in. A lot of them are valid, like we just saw, but a nice little insurance program, you could call it, is when those invalid ones do come in, which we do see, we can go ahead and auto dispute that for you if you would like to. This is totally optional. Of course, you don't have to turn auto dispute on. So what that means is you come into your allowance deductions here, and you can choose specifically which allowance codes you want to be auto disputed versus which ones you want to take a manual look at. And then here, of course, we're only going to dispute those invalid ones because we don't want to waste your time disputing deductions that we know are valid that will likely get rejected. But in summary, kind of what we looked at here was how to add that supplier agreement, which is here, editing it, which you can always do at any time here, and then saw that example of a code 54 that came in with and how that looks like in the app with that validity judgment here. So that's all I have as far as this goes. I'm going to go ahead and hand it back over to Krista, because I believe up next is our Q&A section.
Yeah, thanks, Weston. So like I mentioned earlier, we do have time for Q&A. If you have any questions, please go ahead and put them into that Q&A box and we'll make sure to get those answered. But while you're inputting your questions, just real quick, I'd like to talk through our support resources that we have available. And you, of course, you can see Weston and my email address here located on this slide. But a couple of things I'd like to point out is we at SupplyPike, never want you to get stuck with a question that you can't answer or allow you to move forward with your work that day. So one of the coolest features that we have available is this chat tool in the bottom right-hand corner of SupplyPike. And I'd highly recommend, reaching out or using this tool if you do have a question. So if you click on that chat tool, you can send our support team a message. This goes straight to me and our customer success team, including Beth and Teresa, if you all have ever talked with them before. Please feel free to send any questions that you have to us there. We pride ourselves in being very quick on getting back to you. So we're happy to help in any way we can as you work through some of these deductions throughout the day. I mentioned earlier our help center. You can also access our help center here from this dialogue as well. So if you have, a specific question that you're looking for help on, and you want to read up on it, like allowances, just type that in here, and you'll see some suggested articles. You can see that we've got some information on that validity judgment that Weston talked about. We've got a list of all of the Walmart deduction codes, using auto dispute or setting up the auto disputing for allowances. You can even search for a specific code. So if you're trying to look at a code 54 like Weston showed us, you can just type that in here and it'll take you to our code 54 document, where it goes through a description of the code, how to prevent valid code 54s, if it can or cannot be disputed, and then how to dispute those. We'll generally also give you suggested documentation on the code that you're looking for to make sure you include in order to have a better chance of winning that back. So that help center search can be really helpful right there. And then, of course, I always like to promote our Supplier Wiki events. Our Supplier Wiki team does a great job with educational content on Walmart, Target, Kroger, and Amazon. So make sure you access our Supplier Wiki and take a look at all of the different events that we have available. All right, I had a couple of questions come through. So the first question is, Weston, on code 94s, are those disputable with the supplier agreement?
Yeah, so those are those defective merchandise deductions. And so with that, we do have the option to dispute those with that supplier agreement in place. So defective merchandise can definitely vary dependent on your agreements with Walmart. But if we are showing that you did give that defective merchandise allowance and Walmart hits you with a deduction, we can factor that in, read the analysis there, and show you that you should dispute that in-app with that validity judgment in place.
Awesome. And then one other question, Weston. So should every deduction other than allowance deductions on the supplier agreement be disputed? Do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We see lots of different mindsets here. There's a few different categories of deductions, AP deductions with Walmart, of course. Those shortage deductions account for the biggest bucket for sure. And what we recommend there is we see upwards of 80% of these end up being invalid, AKA you can win your money back if you dispute them. So it's really up to individual finance teams on exactly how often they want to dispute. But at least for those shortage deduction codes, if you have all proof documents necessary, aka your BOL or POD, and you think that there's a chance that you could get that money won back, we definitely recommend you disputing all of those. And I know that can be a hassle, especially if you don't have automation. And so we see a lot of people that they know that they should be disputing. It's just hard to catch up with their backlog from the past 2 years. That's where SupplyPike can help. Deductions Navigator definitely offloads some of that work. So yeah, long answer short, I guess, is it really depends on you and your team. I think that for shortage deductions, you should be disputing most of those unless it's blatantly a valid deduction. The other types would be pricing and allowances, and those are a little more nuanced. Those are valid a lot more. I said at 80% win back rate for those shortage deductions. It's definitely less for those other types of deductions because they're more commonly valid. So yeah, those are a little more, edge case, but the shortage deductions, I would be reviewing and disputing as many of those as possible.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Weston. And just a kind of a tip on that, if you're ever needing, like what is SupplyPike's recommendation on this specific code? Like I said, this knowledge base of our Walmart deduction codes can help point you in the right direction there. So for example, we could look at, one of the pricing deductions that Weston mentioned for code 11. And then we've got a lot of information about, well, first of all, how to prevent those so that you don't get more in the future, but also, can it be disputed? And if so, what are the things that you should consider when disputing those, and how should you dispute those? What kind of supporting documentation should you include when you submit that dispute? So again, this can be really helpful. Highly recommend checking that out, especially if you have some codes that you're not as familiar with or just need some tips on best practices for disputing those codes. Again, I also suggest you're welcome to send our support team a message as well on any code that you need some recommendations or you need help with, and they're happy to get back to you on that. All right, that is all the questions that we have for today and all of the content. So thank you everyone for joining. We really appreciate you. As I mentioned, we'll be sending out a copy of this recording as well as the slide deck in 3 to 4 business days by email. So you should be receiving that soon. If there's anything else we can help you with, please feel free to email us or use our chat tool to reach out. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Bye.